often have you felt restricted to spiritual practices that often seem outdated and of little relevance in today's world? Are you discouraged to express your own creative talents and develop spiritual practices that are uniquely you? The Liturgical Rebels podcast is for people like you who want to reimagine and reconstruct their faith and spiritual practices. It's for those who want to reshape belief and journey closer to God's wholeness with peace, justice, and flourishing, not just for themselves, but for the earth and all its inhabitants. In today's episode of Liturgical Rebels, I will be in conversation with Alan Roxburgh, a pastor, seminary professor, and mentor in leadership and missional transformation, who has written 13 books on missional leadership and culture change. In his work, he addresses questions of church and mission, convinced the Spirit is fermenting a movement of God's people that can't be contained in current narratives of renewal, reform, or fixing existing systems. Alan was born in Liverpool, England, but now lives in British Columbia, Canada. When not traveling or writing, Alan enjoys mountain biking, hiking, cooking, and hanging out with his wife Jane and their 5 grandchildren, as well as drinking great coffee in the Pacific Northwest. Alan, really is a delight to finally be able to get you on my podcast, because I think I've been trying for a number of months to get hold of you. And it's also been a delight thinking back over the time since we first met, which I think must be about 30 years ago.
Oh, it was probably even more than that, yeah.
More than that? Yeah, I would think so. And just reminiscing in my mind on some of the journey that you've been through, because I think you really did have quite a strong Liverpool accent when I first knew you.
Yeah.
And now, of course, you live in British Columbia, Canada.
Correct.
And have a different accent. So tell us a little about your life journey and what has shaped your faith over the many years of your life as a Christian.
Yeah, thank you for asking. Well, that Liverpool accent came honestly and genuinely. I was born and grew up until I was 15 in Liverpool, in Anfield, actually right beside Liverpool's football ground.
Ah.
I tell people it's the most glorious cathedral in all of England. And so that's where I was formed, which means that I was formed in a post-war, depressed working class society, and shaped by all of the ethos of that working class in its sense of being repressed and depressed and everything else. And that fundamentally shaped my life in lots and lots of ways, which I'd be happy to talk about. But we emigrated again when I was, I can't remember, 14 or 15. And Canada became the place where I lived and grew up. And like a Liverpool kid, I came to Canada with the ethos that was given to me by that culture, which was I was a nuisance, I was no good, and I would never amount to anything. And I carried that with me. And as a teenager, late teens, I discovered several things that began to offset that. One was I was a good athlete. And secondly, I had a good mind. I began to do very well in terms of the academic side of things. But what was never healed coming out of Liverpool was the anger and the ferocity of that anger. And make a long story short, for me in my late teens, 18 or 19, I encountered a group of working class Christians who for the first time in my life, loved me for who I was, irrespective of how I behaved. And I didn't know how to deal with that. I had no way of engaging that. And what they said to me was they love me out of their relationship with Jesus. And so I became a Christian, not because I felt guilty, that Liverpool gave me all that. I became a Christian because for the first time in my life, I experienced love, and this love was Jesus. So that began to shape my life. And I went off to University of Toronto, and was actually pursuing graduate work in philosophy when God got a hold of me. And I was called to, I suppose, the church, because in those days, if God calls you, what else do you do?
Yes.
All right. You kind of go to seminary and you get ordained, you become a pastor. That was it. That was it. But for me, it was like putting a square peg in a round hole. In many ways, I was good at it, but it wasn't me. Um, and so I mean, you may ask other questions. The most of my journey has been, and it comes out of being in Liverpool. It's been being on the ground with ordinary people in everyday life and asking these underlying questions of what's going on in this culture that we live in, and how is God understood, and where is Jesus present, and how do you make sense of all of that? So that's been really my journey. And I was a pastor for 25 years. I became a seminary professor. But what really shaped my life, or the last half of my life, has been this whole Leslie Newbigin missional conversation, language I wouldn't even use anymore. But a number of us back in the late 90s wrote this book called Missional Church. And out of that, the rest of my life since the 90s has been shaped working with all kinds of church systems and leaders in what does it mean to be God's missionary people. So maybe that's a good way to begin.
Very good way to begin. It's fascinating to me as I've been talking to people over the last couple of years to see how our understanding of what it means to be missional has changed.
Yes.
And I think in very positive ways. And I know that has certainly been something that you have expressed in your writings and in the kind of work that you do. Can you tell us about that aspect of life and what, because I know the questions you ask are so good, and the kind of way you approach mission is very practical, which isn't necessarily the case.
My understanding of the mission of God was shaped early on by an encounter with Leslie Newbigin. I was in it was actually a theological discussion in Uppsala in Sweden, and Leslie was there, and he took a few of us young bucks out for supper one night, or join us, and began to talk about the mission of God and that. And so his writings shaped me a great deal. And the larger question that Leslie Newbigin was asking, which I think is still an incredibly important and relevant question, which is in late modernity, in the late modern West, what is the nature of Christian mission? What does it look like, both intellectually and on the ground? And so that's the question. And excuse me, the language of missional was really introduced into that question as a way of trying to assist the churches in recognizing that mission wasn't a box that you tick or a program that you have. It was your way of life. And so that word missional got invented to try to say that. And so that became the missional language. But from my perspective, and others may not agree with this, it never achieved its intention. That is, the churches across the spectrum, whether the established traditional or evangelical or whatever, or even the church planted newbie stuff, mission and missional was always a subset of what I call an ecclesiocentric imagination. And I don't think we've ever got out of that. Um, we're constantly trying to think about church and how to make church work and how to make church grow, how to make church on mission. It's church, 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 church. When in point of fact, that that was not what Leslie Newbigin was saying or
No.
writing about, and it's certainly not the Missio Dei. It's certainly not the vocation of the people of God to have these things called churches that they get everybody to come to. So my own journey in the writings I've been doing has really been a practical and an intellectual attempt to get at that question. How do you invite, particularly in the Northern West and North America particularly, the churches into a radically different imagination than it's really all about the church?
Mhm. Mhm. That's quite a shift in thinking. I mean, I think it's a very important shift in thinking. And because, I mean, what you are talking about is a shift from traditional church strategies and techniques to what you call relationality, presence, and attentiveness. I love those three words.
Yeah.
And why I mean, you've talked about why you think this change is
Yeah.
necessary, but what does this mean?
Well, we have to go back a little bit into these larger questions that at the end of the day, what happens in the emergence of the modern is what, it's not my language, it's somebody else's. I call modernity's wager. It was really a sociologist by the name of Seligman who coined this phrase, and what he means is that somewhere in the 17th, 18th centuries, what emerges is this contract, this wager, which is, and he puts it this way: life can be lived well without God.
Mm.
And it's not that people cease to believe in God. They continue to believe in God, or as the philosophes would say, if you need God, that's okay. But that God became completely irrelevant to the actual ways we live and what we do, because we became convinced that we were the primary agents. We make the world. It's kind of a Hegelian Marxism that most Christians don't recognize it, but that's who they are. And so what happens is that church becomes a managed space for educated middle class people for whom God is this kind of experience that I need weekly. But what happens to the rest of life is irrelevant in terms of God.
Yeah.
So another way to put that is that we've become those for whom God is a wonderful emotional presence, but has no real reality on the ground amongst us. And so you see this in most of the programs that churches develop, in the kind of outreach that they have, and who runs them, and the strategies, and it's present in the way churches go about developing strategic plans, and they're going to be innovative and adaptive and all this stuff. God is not present. Now, why is this so important? Because to the extent that God is not present, I mean, in the ways we live and think and act, to that extent, what we do is we objectify human beings. We turn the other into an object of our own ends. It's called evangelism and church planting and all kinds of other stuff. And it's not intentional. And it's part of the reason why we dwell in a society of such loneliness and isolation and brokenness, not just out there, but on Sunday mornings in our congregations. And the whole, this breakdown of society that's going on is really a loss of our ability to be in relational covenant with one another. And the state is not going to fix that. And neither is the market.
Mm-hmm.
And neither is the Harvard Business Review with all its methods of leadership and technique. The only thing that fixes that are communities that are
Mm-hmm.
centered around the reality of God and Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what's absent. Now,
Mm-hmm.
the thing is, this is the other side of this. That and this is where Newbegin and the mission is that God is at work in the world. God is
Yes.
God is remaking and reweaving a world, but the only way that we will know how to be God's people is by shifting from the question, what's the tactic and strategy, to the question of what is God doing ahead of us
Yes.
in our
Yes.
neighbors and at the margins?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the question we forgot to ask. And that requires not technique, and it doesn't even require sociological research and data. It calls us to live and dwell as ordinary people with the other.
Mm-hmm.
And only in that living, and this is the piece that I think upsets people when I say this, the only way we can know what God is doing, where the Spirit is at work, where Jesus is present, is the only place is where we go to be with the other.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only
Mm-hmm.
place.
Mm-hmm.
We do not know what God is doing when we have big meetings in big tents with big leaders and lots of PowerPoints. It's
Yes.
a different kind of journey. And
Yes.
maybe that's enough for the moment.
No, well, I mean, I agree wholeheartedly with what you're saying. I mean, it's interesting because uh, I was just re-listening to one of the interviews that I did not long ago, and I was commenting in that rather than asking the question, why does God let things happen? We should be asking the question, where is God in the midst of this? And I
Absolutely.
think what you're saying is the same kind of thing. We don't ask, where is God in the midst of this beautiful world in which we live? Where is God in the midst of the struggles of the marginalized and the abused? Where is God in the midst of all the violence that's going on in our world? And these are the questions that ask for some hard action from us, which is why we don't like to ask them, I
That's
think,
right. And they ask for pretty radical actions
Oh, they
from
really
us. And,
do. They
you
really
know,
do.
I I I want to own the fact that I grew up in a very poor, marginal working class society in Liverpool, but I'm now very, very middle class.
Mhm,
I've
mhm,
got, you know, four graduate degrees and, the whole 9 yards. And that this attending to and dwelling and being with God is very difficult for a middle class person like me.
it is. Mhm,
And I've had to do numbers of things. And this is going to sound strange. Number one, I've had to give up and lay down the idea that I have leadership in the church.
mhm,
That the more I think that's important, the less I will be attentive to what God is doing, because it will make me ecclesiocentric over and over and over again. The second thing I've had to learn, and it's not, I want to be clear, this is hard. The second thing I've had to learn is to be rooted in practices like the daily office
mhm, mhm,
and the examine. The third thing I've had to learn is place. The place is not like a cup in which you pour water. The place is is the physical, real place where you dwell. And one of the ways I've had to learn to do that is by giving up my car.
mhm,
Jane and I each had a car, so I could go wherever I want, whenever I wanted, all the time. And I gave it up. I gave it up so that I had to walk everywhere, and I have to pay attention. Not have to. I pay attention to my neighbor. As
mhm,
I did that, I began to discover that I had little capacity to listen.
mhm,
That when I remember the first time it happened, Phil lives a few doors down. I've lived here 15 years down, a few years down, Phil invited me down to have a beer. And so I went down the alleyway. His garage door was open. He was sitting there with another guy with a glass of beer. We sat down to have a beer. And I realized I couldn't listen without having an answer. I couldn't listen without figuring out what the solution was. And just that whole discipline of unlearning that I'm the middle class know-how expert to just be with was a radical revolutionary thing. And the only space where you can actually talk about God's presence. So what I'm trying to say is that this is not an easy journey. It's not a Richard Foster's spiritual journey on the coffee table that I open once a week. It's something very different than that.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, no, you're right. It's fascinating. Now, in reference to this, in a way, you live in community, don't you? And have for many years, as we have. And I think that the kinds of things that you're talking about can really only be learnt in community as well. It's not just how we interact with our neighbors; it's how we interact with those that we reside with as well.
Yeah. I think that we live community, extended family. We bought a large house, and there's 3 family units in it, interacting and living with each other. But the beginnings of that, Christine, were almost 18 odd years ago now, and it wasn't so much as a kind of a philosophical, ideological thing that we began, like we also live in community. It was that living in Vancouver, like Seattle, where you are, like many cities now, is just exorbitantly expensive. And you watched what it was doing to the generations underneath you. And so what we did was began this journey is our daughter, their husband, and their 3 kids, we decided we're going to buy a house together. And we're going to begin to discover what it means to share and have common space and live together. And that's been transformative in terms of, and profoundly countercultural. So, for example, it's just normal for me to hear people say, "Oh, you're so lucky. Our kids and grandkids live 1,000 miles away," or we only see them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas it's just normal to sit around a multi-generational table and eat together and talk together and engage together all the time. You don't even think about it. And the kind of learning that goes on there. So let me give you one little example. Numbers of years ago, this is my wife, Jane. She makes sure that at 5:00 every night, we sit outside, and sometimes even in the winter, around the fire, and we do examine. And
as a community,
well,
or just the 2 of you.
Well, whoever turns up, yeah.
Yes.
And we didn't notice this because we began doing it, Jane and I, and then our granddaughter and a couple of the grandsons there. The granddaughter, Maddie, she was probably 12 at the point, turned to us and said, "Nana, when are we going to do the examine?"
Oh.
And now, you read all these silly books on discipleship and everything else, and they got all these methods and everything else. Well, there it is, sitting on the deck around the campfire. There it is, around the table, eating together. And I could go on and tell those sorts of stories. So it's been a tremendous gift. About 12 years ago, our daughter, in her mid-30s, developed a very aggressive cancer. and it was a family. It
Mm.
was an extended family that gathered and created space for all of that to happen. Uh, it's been so good.
Mhm.
I would never ever opt for the living alone.
Mhm. Oh,
Uh,
I agree
yeah,
wholeheartedly. I mean, we don't do community with family, but we do community and
yeah,
have all of our married life,
yeah.
and I cannot imagine living alone,
No,
you know,
no,
it's been such a wonderful experience for
yeah,
us. It really has
yeah.
been, and, yeah, and just the spiritual things, you know, we just do something once a week together, but it's just been a really good connecting kind of thing, that
Mhm.
we've been involved in, and,
Well, well, it's the way. Forgive my coughing. It's the way when we talk about the mission of God, the God's reweaving of creation. Uh, literally. Well, I mean, this is not about a church program.
no.
This is a way in which a people live in their neighborhood and community, so that, give an example, next door neighbor, uh, da- well, Dagmar's one of them, but another next door neighbor, uh, I mean, she looks and she says, "Oh, what a wonderful kind of life you guys have," as I look across the fence. Now, it's
Mhm,
not just looking across the fence because they come over, they join us. We can do things
mhm.
that it just seems to me other people just don't seem to think about.
Yes,
So, because
yes.
you live in community and you think about community, we're constantly saying to our neighbors, "Come on over."
Mhm,
And we people do it in different ways. We have a pizza oven on outside, and so Friday night is pizza night, and we invite neighbors over and friends over, and we're sitting around talking and having conversation, and but all of that, it's not a plan, it's not a strategy, it's not a tactic. It's a deliberate way of life
mhm,
that you are learning to practice. And I want to say it that way, but it's a deliberate way of life that requires you to lay down a whole lot of other stuff.
mhm,
Yeah.
mhm. It's interesting, as you talk, I'm reminded of a young intern we had 1 year a number of years ago now, and at the end of her time with us, I said to her, "What have you most enjoyed about your summer with us?" And she said, "Eating meals together."
Yeah, absolutely.
I was blown away. She said, "You know, every day, no matter what we were involved in, we would stop and eat lunch together."
Yeah.
And I'd never seen it as anything important in any way, shape, or form. You know,
Mm,
this was what part of, inviting others into our lives was
yeah.
all about.
Well,
And,
yeah,
you know, and yet it's so
it's
important.
so important. And you know that relationships are in trouble when you stop eating together.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's for sure. That's for sure. Um, now, I haven't read your most recent book, though I really want to. It sounds very intriguing
Mm,
that you wrote with Roy Searle of
yes.
the Northumbria community.
Yes.
And it's called Forming Communities of Hope in the Great Unravelling.
Yes.
Um, can you tell us about this book? And I know in talking, I listened to a couple of the videos that you put up, and you said, you know, uh, what we asked the questions, what can we do? What is the fix? Instead of considering where is God in the midst of it. So what we've been talking about, it sounds as though that's part of what you're talking about. But give us some more background to that.
Sure. There's different kinds of background. One,
Wherever you'd like to go.
yeah, yeah, sure. One, there's actually a great American, Jane Jacobs, who many, many years ago wrote a book called uh, about the city and how the city works, and then wrote about economics and other sorts of things. And one of the books that she wrote just before she died was, this is not going to sound great, was about the coming time of darkness that lies in front of us.
Mm,
And what she was saying I'll use my language, is that what we're witnessing right today in the midst of things going on is the whole unraveling
Mhm,
of the modern project.
mhm, mhm,
It's stopped working. It can no longer deliver on the promises that it's made, but it's the only story that people know.
mhm,
And one of the things at the center of that story is some of you may have remembered a program many years ago I watched with my kids called the $6 Million Man,
mhm,
and it begins with uh, this test pilot crashing his supersonic jet, and he's almost dead. And the overstatement is, we have the technology, we can fix it.
mhm.
And,
Yes,
and that's the mantra. That's the human agency mantra, and it's falling apart. It's no longer
yes.
giving. The other part of the mantra is, I am at the center of everything,
Mhm,
right? So the unraveling is that this is the world that's unraveling. And the 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 second part of it is that there's no quick fix to this. There's no big man who's going to come in and make everything greater again. That that what we are witnessing is the end of an age,
mhm, mhm,
and we don't know what is going to take its place. We do not know what's coming. But what I believe is that it's more like the time of Benedict than it is the time of some bright new future.
mhm, mhm,
So the book is written into that context. Secondly, the book is written into the context of work I was doing with literally hundreds of pastors who were trying to come to terms with what it was going to mean to be leaders post COVID,
mhm,
because and that's the more immediate source of the book, because for most of these leaders there was an expectation that if we can just get through COVID, things will go back to normal.
mhm, mhm.
And they were calling me and they were saying it's not going back to normal. And the primary question they were asking is, what happened? And and so I began to develop videos, and I began to develop, you know, sort of gatherings and meetings in which I said, look, here's what happened. And I describe it as this 75-year story from the end of the Second World War to the present.
Mhm, mhm.
And I said, this is the story, and it's failing us, and it's over, but it's the only story we know. And it's a story about technique and method and outcomes and strategies, and it stopped working. And they all got it. They all said, you've given us language for what we're experiencing. But immediately, they said that. Immediately, they then said, what shall we do?
Mhm, mhm. Yeah.
And without understanding and some of them got angry when I said this, without understanding, by asking the question, what should we do? They're actually asking the question, what's the technique?
Yes.
What's the fix? So
Mhm,
that became the front end of the book. And we said, look, you cannot ask the what do we do fix question. This is like the exiles in Babylon, where they keep asking, how do we get back to Jerusalem?
mhm,
And that's not what's going on. And that's not going to help us one little bit. And so that's when in the book we go into some biblical pieces around Benedict, about Luke Acts. We talk about, not Benedict, we talk about Jeremiah, and we say, what happens when a world is unraveling, whether Old Testament, New Testament, or early church, is that God doesn't say, come up with a strategy to get back. God invites us to stay where we are, in the unpleasant places where we think we are, and to live in a set of practices.
mhm,
And so the
mhm.
book begins to outline those practices and talks about dwelling, discerning, and exploring. So that's the genesis of the book. It's written in the context of there isn't a bright future ahead. Now we don't play that up, but that's the reality is that, you know, I'm not American, so I got to be careful here. But as uh, as America isn't made great again, you are going to find megachurches emerging that
Mhm.
said God can make it great again. But underneath that, it's going to be small gatherings of God's people in local communities shaped around practices and asking the question, what is it that God is doing here amongst us?
Amen. Yes. No, I agree. And part of what excites me is seeing some of those small groups,
Yes.
or small movements,
Yes.
like, because there's part of what I'm aware of is that there's not a single movement going on. There are lots of small
Exactly.
movements
Yeah.
going on.
That's exactly right.
And which is so often the way that God works.
Yeah.
God doesn't work through
Yeah.
one person usually.
Right.
God doesn't work through one church. God works through a whole network. Um,
In
and
all kinds of diffuse ways.
yes, yes.
And it's not ours to say we can see the pattern. This is what the future's going to look like. And
And
we
you
could
should join us.
and you should join it. And we're going to write a book on it. And here's how you get in the right canoe and go in the right direction. You know, all of that is what I call modernity gone mad.
Mhm.
And yeah, but it is
Well,
the prevalent way.
and really what you're inviting us to do is to hold on to the tension of the mystery that we don't understand,
Exactly. Exactly.
Um, and that, I remember John Stott saying many years ago, the answer, it's not the answers that matter, it's the questions that we ask.
Yeah.
And really what you're telling is we need to be asking new questions,
Very
a-
different questions. Yeah.
and without really being concerned about what the answers are that we get.
Totally right. I
And that's a scary place to be.
It is a scary place to be if the place upon which you stand is your belief that you can make something happen.
Mm.
Then it's a scary place. Uh, but you see, the 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 vocation to which we're called to is the mystery of this one who is making all things new. And it's not me who's making all things new. It is God in Christ who is doing that. And I don't have the picture. All
Yes.
right. But I
Mhm.
do know what the practices are on the ground in the ordinary. And the problem is that I mentioned this earlier on, in modernity, even the church bought into Hegel and Marx. You see, Marx is not just this communist economy thing. Marx really did believe that we can make the future,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And I mean, I just watched this. Like I had one guy do something called future proofing your church, and my response was, how could somebody? You might think that under your breath, but as a Christian, to articulate that,
Yes.
it's heretical.
Yes.
Anyway, I don't need to go down those paths.
No, well, I think what you're talking about is so important. So l what do you see as the most important practices that people should institute? I mean, you've kind of inferred some of this, but, if you could articulate it clearly, what
Sure,
are the
sure.
most important
Yeah,
practices?
yeah, yeah. Um, the list is not long. I was asked this question yesterday by a leader in your home in Australia, Christine,
Mhm,
and I said, so let me say this to leaders: numbers of things. First of all, if what we're talking about is making any sense, one of the most important practices and habits to allow to sink into our bones is that our people are not our project, that we are not trying to make them into something, missional this or that. These are God's people amongst whom we dwell and love and be present. That's the first thing. The second thing is what I call attention. For example, let me give you an example. When I introduce the practice of dwelling in Scripture to people, initially they love it, including clergy. This is a wonderful new way of, and we love it. But if you keep doing it, particularly in the same text, sooner or later, 2 or 3 months in, you're going to get a visit. And the visit is from members of the group who are going to say, do we have to stay in this same text? And because you see, our attention is constantly directed, even though we don't want it to what's the ROI here? Like, if we do this, what's the return on investment? Or what are the outcomes we can plan for and get? Or will this bring more people into the church? So
Yes.
our attention is shifted to all those things. And so for a leader, one of the most fundamental practices is in creating spaces where people believe, I'm not an object here. I'm loved for who I am in Christ. The second thing is, how do we help people to shift their attention from what's the strategy, what's the outcome, to how do we attend to God and neighbor? Those are the critical things. Now, underneath that, there are very clear practices. So I talk about dwelling in the Word as a critical practice, but also dwelling with one another. And that dwelling with one another is, as we attend to Scripture, not without it, as we attend to Scripture, how do we learn to listen to one another's stories? And I don't know what your experience is, but I remember as a pastor how shocked I was when I went into a congregation, and after a while I began to learn these people do not know each other's stories at all. And so you began to create space for that. The third way of dwelling is by what I talked about earlier, just learning to be with and listen with the people in our neighborhood and our community. So those are critical practices. Another critical practice, again, which is not easy to learn, is continually asking together as a community, how do we stop thinking it's all about doing for and helping, and come to learn the practice of being with and walking alongside? So these are the key pieces. And the wonderful thing about those key pieces, you don't need to be an expert. You do not need to go off to some seminary and get some doctorate and write some silly thesis on all of this. It's right there, present in practice amongst us. And it's really about ordinary everyday life. You could add lots of things around this, like just pick up the practice of having a meal once a week in which you invite someone else to be present with you.
Yes.
And as you sit around the table, learn to ask questions like, what do you love most about living here? Or what, you get the point. I mean,
Yes.
This simple stuff is the revolutionary stuff.
No, I would agree wholeheartedly. I think that we've complicated what it means to be a follower of Jesus so much that it's been very threatening for people in so many different ways, both for those that don't see themselves as followers and for those that do see themselves as followers. And I think it's so easy to just do Sunday, partly because of the fact that we've complicated it so much.
Well, but the problem, Christine, as I observe, is that people just do Sunday. They find Sunday utterly boring.
True.
and they
Yes.
give up on it.
Mhm,
and
mhm.
and of course then the leaders of these churches have got to figure out how to make Sunday more exciting, which is about your worship
Yes.
bands and your
Yeah.
theater and everything
Uh-huh.
else. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's a fascinating kind of discussion, and, I wish that we could keep talking about this for forever,
Yeah.
but it's a good place to start, and, is there something else that you'd like to say before we finish off here?
I, these are things that in my advanced age, I become more and more passionate about, and the discovery that this is actually really, really basic, simple stuff. It's not
Mhm.
complicated, but it's rooted. It's rooted in the hunger for God.
Amen.
And I don't want to. There are a few who are called to a vocation of being theologically informed and shaped and implied. So I don't want to. I don't want to be overly simplistic. I spend a lot of time doing theology and reading and writing and reflecting, because I think that's part of the vocation to which I've been called. But I do not want in any way not underline the simplicity of this.
Mhm,
But it is about giving up.
mhm,
It's very much about giving up. My experience is that I couldn't be the big important leader and engage in what I've just described to you.
mm, mhm, mhm. Well, that's a very compelling note on which to end, so thank you, Alan, for this.
Krista,
It's been
thank you
very
so
good.
much. It's been an honor to do it. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah.
You're welcome. In today's conversation, Alan Roxburgh shared his transformative journey of faith, beginning from his working class roots in Liverpool to his current life in Canada. He discussed the evolution of missional living, emphasizing the importance of relationality and community over traditional church practices. Alan highlighted the need for churches to shift their focus from programs to genuine relationships, addressing the loneliness and isolation present in modern society. He discussed his latest book, Forming Communities of Hope in the Great Unravelling, considering where God is in the midst of God's people in this time of great unraveling. Alan advocated for simple, everyday practices that foster connection with God and others while navigating the complexities of a changing world. In our next episode, I will be in conversation with John Vanderlaar, a progressive autistic writer, musician, theologian, and liturgist who loves exploring life, Jesus the Christ, the Bible, liturgy, and worship from the perspective of evolutionary spirituality. John is the author of 3 books, including The Hour That Changes Everything, and writes at Sacredis Your Life on Substack. John lives outside of Johannesburg in South Africa with his wife, Debbie. They have 2 adult sons. I am Christine Syme, the author of Celtic Advent Following an Unfamiliar Path and The Gift of Wonder. My other books include Digging Deeper, The Art of Contemplative Gardening, and To Garden with God. I also write regularly on Substack. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the podcast. Please also share it with your friends or join me on Substack, Instagram, or Facebook.